With the wig like this, it looks really cursed.
Hi everyone, I'm going to do a quick overview of how I made my Shin Hati cosplay. So I ended up rushing to make this costume in less than 3 weeks for New York Comic Con, so I didn't film a lot of the process. But I'm going to go over as much as I can to give you an idea and advice for making this costume yourself. First, we can start with the tunic. I used New Look sewing pattern 6483. I liked this pattern because the shape was really close to what I wanted, and it also had a center back seam. I had the back panel split down the middle, making sure one panel was longer than the other. The panels needed to be uneven because my closure was going to be Velcro, and I was going to be using these La Mode antique clasps from Joanns craft store. They actually have a few variations of these clasps at Joanns, and they all looked really similar to the original design in the TV show. And, as a plus, they're metal, and they serve to actually clasp your garment shut rather than just be as a decoration. Once I had my base the way I liked it, it was time to move on to the details. To get the cool raised V details, I took gray suede cord that matched my gray fabric. Now, as a disclaimer, when watching the show, the fabric read as gray on my screen. Don't come for me for the accuracy, because I don't mind taking creative liberties. Go kick rocks. I traced straight lines with a ruler in fabric chalk and used a zigzag stitch to secure the suede. It actually turned out amazing, and I really love the added detail it has. Let's move on to the black undershirt. To save time, I bought a mock neck turtleneck sweater from Amazon, and I seam ripped the arms off to get my sleeve pattern. Once I got my pattern, I just worked out the lines and seam details and measured out the contrast panel. It adds a detail that's very subtle, but it adds body and dimension rather than just a flat basic sleeve. I opted to use a thicker cotton fabric for my sleeves rather than what came with the undershirt. I think it just adds a little bit better body and dimension to the garment. Now for the skirt. The skirt was a completely custom garment. I originally had the idea to use my old Witcher gambeson as a rough base, but each panel is different from all the other panels, and each one's a slightly different length. If you really need a pattern to go off of, I recommend checking out the Simplicity S9472, and their A pattern skirt is pretty close. Just don't sew the panels together to get the flowy look that Shin's skirt has, and double the amount of patterns, so you have around 6 to 8 panels to go off of. It was a lot of guessing and checking to get it right, and I made about 3 muslin fabric mock-ups before I was happy. I would say if you're a beginner, the skirt is probably the hardest garment to get right, simply because there aren't that many great patterns out there for you to go off of. The closure was just a small clasp at the waist. For the Shin Guards, those were made by a duct tape pattern, transferred to paper, and then to the final fabric. It was a pretty simple process. Then I just glued some gray bias tape for the details. These somehow turned out slightly uneven, so I will be remaking these at a later date. The wig is from Amazon that I trimmed and curled with a curling wand. I personally recommend thinning out the wig a lot with shears, since her hair is really wispy in the show. You don't have to, but I think this is a nice detail to add. I also used my airbrush and added some root shadowing to give it a more realistic look. If you don't have an airbrush, a watered down acrylic paint and a spray bottle works just as well. For the pants, I used this old pair of dress slacks that I've used with other Star Wars costumes. You can hardly see the pants, and I was on a time crunch. If I were to go back and make the pants, I would probably use the Simplicity pattern, and I'll put that up on the screen for you guys to check out. I made the leather belt from scratch. I really like doing custom leather work, especially with how long-lasting and good it looks. There are a lot of great tutorials out there on how to make a standard belt, but one tool I recommend is a strap cutter. It's only $20 and you'll get perfect straps every time. The little pendant that I used is actually a random ornament from Joanns. I don't mind the creative liberty of it not being screen accurate, because I think it looks pretty good. And now for the armor. I used Cami Cosplay's armor patterns as a base, and added my own details and changes. This is a trial and error process that I tried on paper first. Now, I had the idea to try and coat the foam with resin to make them more durable and shiny. I had never worked with resin before, and the process was kind of a mess and honestly a huge hassle. I knew I was going to get 3D prints made for the next version of this look, so I just kind of ran with it. The plus side of using this resin is that it's super flexible, and even with traveling to New York for NYCC and to Los Angeles for LACC, only one piece has a minor crack from too much tension. So anyway, if you're a beginner and you still want to have a semi-flexible plastic hard coating on the foam, try this Epsilon resin, but be warned, you'll need a lot of it and you'll have a lot of sanding between coats to get it smooth from all of the runs. I'm talking this will easily take 4 to 5 days, and there's really no way to speed it up due to the curing time. If all this sounds like too much, just heat seal your 8 to 10 millimeter foam with a hairdryer or a heat gun on low, add 5 to 6 coats of Plastidip, and then paint with either an airbrush or Krylon silver spray paint. That's the least fuss option that would still look good in my opinion. And this is a technique that I've used on previous armor, like for my Vi cosplay, and it looks pretty good. Side note, this Krylon silver and gold paint is probably the most amazing product I've ever used. It gets so shiny when you put it on a smooth surface, and it's really accessible since it's just a rattle can. However, for this project, I did end up using my all-clad metal spray paints in my airbrush. Pretty much all the closure on the armor on this costume is hook and loop. I will link the file to the 3D prints I'm going to upgrade my armor with. I'll work on sanding and smoothing that out, mostly with Bondo, sandable automotive primer, and patience. There's a lot of tutorials out there on how to sand and finish your 3D prints, including this one I'll put up on my screen. This costume has brought me so much happiness. I really enjoyed making this costume and showing it off at the cons. I even made some new friends at LACC in an impromptu Shin meetup, and we even found ourselves a couple of Balins. We got some great photos and made some awesome memories. Me and the Shin squad even got to meet Ivana at the con, and afterwards my husband's photo that he took of all of us was shared by Shin Hati herself. We of course were all reeling at having been noticed by our idol, and I feel so lucky to have had such an amazing experience through the power of cosplay. Well, that's pretty much it. If you have any specific questions, or if I missed anything, feel free to ask questions below. Thanks for watching!